Let's discuss Kaylee Hottle. This is another lecture. I am Alexei. Today we will examine a brief but consequential career and what it teaches us about representation, language, and how large productions can reorganize themselves for inclusion.
Hi, I'm Priyanka, the teaching assistant. I'm looking forward to thinking through the details with you.
Let's begin with the foundations. Kaylee Hottle was a deaf American actress who portrayed Gia in Godzilla vs. Kong and later in Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. To many viewers, she was the first time they saw American Sign Language used not as a prop, but as a living language anchoring a character's relationships. In simpler terms, if most blockbusters are like loud orchestras, Hottle introduced a new instrument and showed that it belongs in the melody, not merely in the background.
Maybe think of it like turning on captions and discovering they are not an add-on. They are actually part of the story's voice. That was the feeling many people described when they saw her sign on screen.
In more formal terms, representation in media shapes audience schemas and perceived social norms. When we observe authentic signing by a deaf performer, we reduce the cognitive distance between viewers and the represented community, which over time can influence attitudes through mechanisms akin to the parasocial contact effect. American Sign Language, a fully natural visual language with its own grammar, is not merely a modality. It encodes culture and identity. So when ASL is integral to character motivation and plot, as with Gia, the film is also conveying a cultural narrative. Importantly, on those sets, co-stars Rebecca Hall and Alexander Skarsgård learned ASL for off-camera communication. This signals a production environment optimizing for access rather than asking the deaf performer to adapt unilaterally.
So the stakes are practical. Millions watch those films. When people see ASL used naturally, it normalizes a language many have never encountered directly. And that changes expectations for future productions too.
Historically, cinema did not do this well. Deaf characters were often portrayed by hearing actors with simulated signing, or the deaf identity was treated as metaphor rather than reality. The result was a persistent miseducation of audiences, who rarely met ASL as a complete linguistic system. Thus, Hottle's work marks a corrective, bringing authenticity into a mainstream franchise, the Monsterverse, which by design speaks to a very large global public. To ground our discussion with basic coordinates, Hottle was born in Atlanta, Georgia, into an all-deaf family. On her father's side, there were 4 generations of deaf relatives. She grew up fluent in American Sign Language, and later attended the Texas School for the Deaf in Austin, where she also competed in track and field. Her screen work began in commercials, notably a 2017 advertisement for Convo, a video relay service widely used by ASL users. She also appeared in an informational project titled 10 Deaf Children, One Powerful Message, aligned with advocacy for equal rights.
And that Convo ad is how an assistant director connected to Kong Skull Island noticed her. That guided casting director Sarah Halley Finn during a search for a deaf actress for the role of Gia. This is one of those nice examples where community media bridges into a blockbuster pipeline.
In 2021, she made her feature debut in Godzilla vs. Kong. The same year, she appeared on television in Magnum P.I. in an episode titled Texas Wedge. In 2024, she reprised Gia in Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. And for that performance, she received a nomination for Best Performance by a Younger Actor at the 52nd Saturn Awards. Unfortunately, in July 2026, she sustained injuries in a single-vehicle collision in Ijamsville, Maryland. She was airlifted by Maryland State Police to R. Adams Cowley Shock Trauma Center and was declared dead at age 18. Police stated that excessive speed was believed to be a factor in preliminary assessments. Her father announced her death in a video statement on Facebook.
That difference in outcomes in a single crash is always hard to process. We send care to her family and community.
On a brief personal note, I study how symbolic systems shape our inferences. Cinema is a symbolic system of unusual reach. When a blockbuster centers ASL, we can infer a downstream effect on what children consider normal. To borrow a chess analogy, one accurate early move alters the entire endgame. Hottle's performances were such moves. This brings us to three questions we should examine. First, why did deaf representation lag historically? Second, what if Hottle had not been discovered through that community ad? Third, what obstacles remain today even after high-profile success stories?
So, I guess we can start by thinking about the longer history. What historical factors contributed to the lack of deaf representation before her time? Why did it take so long for authentic casting to become normal in big films?
Several vectors converged. First, early industry practices privileged what we might call auditory essentialism, assuming dialogue equals sound-based speech, which marginalized visual languages. Second, structural barriers in education and employment pipelines meant fewer deaf professionals had direct access to casting networks. Third, risk-averse studios defaulted to hearing actors for perceived efficiency. Fourth, subtitling and captioning infrastructures were underdeveloped for much of the 20th century, rendering ASL unintelligible to hearing gatekeepers who wrongly equated unintelligibility with narrative weakness. Add to this a broader social history of oralist ideologies that devalued signing, and we obtain a model of exclusion that was self-reinforcing for decades.
What about technology? Did certain technologies change the calculus, like caption standards or digital casting? I am curious how those interacted with social movements.
Technology and activism co-evolved. Improvements in captioning, widespread streaming norms that default to captions, and the visibility of ASL on social platforms lowered comprehension barriers. Video relay services normalized real-time signed communication across distance, which broadened public familiarity. Meanwhile, industry practices evolved to include interpreters on set, visual language coaches, and more flexible production schedules. Critically, social movements advocating disability rights and authentic casting reframed the discussion from accommodation to collaboration. In simple terms, once audiences could easily follow ASL and studios had workflows to support it, the excuse structure collapsed.
So the short answer is that technology made access easier and activism made access expected. Building on that question, what if Hottle had not been discovered through the Convo commercial? Would the role of Gia have gone to someone else? And how might that have changed on-screen deaf representation?
Counterfactuals require caution, but we can map plausible branches. One branch is delay, where the production continues searching and eventually identifies another deaf performer through community organizations or schools. Another branch is substitution, where a hearing actor is cast and the role's signing is simulated, weakening authenticity. A third branch involves script alteration, in which the character's deaf identity is reduced to a plot device. Given that casting director Sarah Halley Finn was explicitly seeking a deaf actress, the first branch seems most consistent with the documented intent. Nevertheless, the particular resonance Hottle achieved, rooted in her lived experience and family lineage, cannot be assumed fungible. Representation is not merely a checkbox. It is a function of the performer's cultural fluency and the ecosystem built around them.
And if not via a video relay service ad, what discovery routes are most effective? Open calls, theatre, Schools? I wonder which channels consistently surface authentic talent.
The practical answer is inclusive scouting through deaf schools and universities, deaf theater companies, community media, and partnerships with advocacy groups. Also, building trust so that word of mouth circulates opportunities. Productions can provide interpreters for auditions, accept video submissions in ASL, and compensate community consultants. In short, widen the aperture and meet talent where they already are.
Simple takeaway. Inclusive scouting is the difference between luck and a system. To shift gears a bit, what are the current challenges in achieving true representation today, even after high-profile examples like Hottle? Where do we still fall short?
We can identify several constraints, specifically pipeline scarcity, meaning few opportunities for deaf writers, directors, and producers to shape narratives upstream. Episodic tokenism, where a single character appears without sustained community context. Access gaps, such as inconsistent on-set interpreting or inadequate rehearsal time for visual languages. Distribution frictions, including inaccurate captions or international releases that strip ASL nuance in localization. Marketing that marginalizes the deaf performer in press cycles, and intersectional underrepresentation, in which deaf performers of color, including Korean American talent like Hottle, face compounded barriers. Progress is real, as evidenced by major franchises adapting to ASL on set. Yet durability of change requires institutionalization rather than case-by-case heroics.
And on the audience side, what can media consumers do that is concrete, besides posting praise on social media?
Consumers can reward accessible releases with their attention, select caption screenings, support projects that credit deaf consultants, and ask festivals to provide ASL interpreters at Q&A sessions. They can follow and amplify deaf creators, and when captions are inaccurate, submit corrections rather than shrug. None of this is glamorous, but norms shift when small actions repeat at scale. Mathematically, it is a cumulative function. Further research is needed, in particular, longitudinal studies measuring how repeated exposure to authentic signing in mainstream contexts affects attitudes over years, not days. Comparative work on authentic versus simulated signing and their distinct audience effects. And production studies that quantify which on-set practices most improve outcomes for deaf talent. The literature is suggestive, but we require more data over time. To summarize, Kaylee Hottle was a deaf American actress whose portrayal of Gia in the Monsterverse placed ASL at the center of global franchise storytelling. She emerged from an all-deaf family, fluent in ASL, began with community-facing commercials like a 2017 Convo ad, crossed into features in 2021, returned in 2024, and was recognized with a Saturn Award nomination. Her life ended in 2026 after a vehicle collision in Maryland, with police citing excessive speed as believed to be a factor in preliminary statements.
The big questions we considered were: why representation lagged historically? What might have happened without that discovery path? And what barriers remain now? Each points to systems rather than isolated stories.
For further study, you might explore the history of ASL in film, from early shorts to contemporary blockbusters, and how captioning standards evolved alongside. It is a surprisingly rich archive. Thank you for listening. Keep your curiosity active and your attention precise.
Thank you, Professor. That was helpful to think through, actually.